Вроде делает вид, что пишет.
Это что так не
Что главное, я не знаю, где у него карточки. А, они там, видимо, снизу. Нет. Блин, вы все настроили, а она не стоит.
Почему?
А, я на стуле стою.
Ну да, да.
Okay, it's time to start, and it's an unexpected and great pleasure for me to introduce to you Mark Donohue, who's actually one of my favorite linguists in the world, and is, well, he's a great linguist who combines a huge experience of doing fieldwork of various languages, both Austronesian and non-Austronesian languages of this region around Papua New Guinea, with deep theoretical and typological insights into various properties of these languages, as well as into aerial linguistics. And I think it's a great privilege for all of us to have him here. And I'm looking forward to learning quite a lot from Mark, and wish everyone to do so. So the floor is yours.
Let me just check, is my voice sufficient to carry to the back of the room? And people at the back here will then say, yeah. Yeah, well, that means I don't have to use these things. This rather ridiculous title is what came to me when I had to come up with a title. I will give you a quick oral overview of what we're going to, what this 4 days will be about, and then we'll get on to the break. The Pacific Ocean, we know where that is. The edge of the Pacific, I'm referring to not just the Pacific area, but also the eastern edge of Eurasia. And that will be the stepping stone to more wide engagement of the world, so not just the Pacific. Structures and stories, alluding to what Peter just said. The structures are the language structures, mostly, but also other social fields of inquiry, archaeology, genetics. The stories are what we can infer from the linguistic structures. So I will be going through a little bit of interesting structures from the languages we're examining, but mostly what we can infer, what stories we can make by combining the structures of different languages together with principles of aerial typology and analysis. So, today begins with stories. We begin with the non-linguistic stories before we introduce the linguistics, and then throw those stories on top as well. We're going to have a quick introduction to what the Pacific is geographically. We all know this, but just to make sure. Then we'll talk about human presence in the Pacific. What is the history, what is the nature of human occupation of the Pacific? And then you'll have a little bit of linguistics at the end of today, in a way that interacts with the geography and the demography. So geographically, if I had to ask you for a one-word description of the Pacific, what one word would you give me, other than water? Ocean. Water, ocean, yeah, not that. Anything else, an adjective?
Sunny.
I'm going with big. Simply because I can prove the bigness of this. How much of that is not the Pacific Ocean? Not much, and that's half of this planet. So big is a very important factor here. You can see very little, anything but ocean there. If we twist around a bit, you see the edge of Eurasia coming into view. This is the edge of the Pacific I referred to in the title. That edge is both Eurasian and Pacific in that it's relevant in both directions. We rotate a little bit further, and in addition to the edge of Eurasia, you see, as somebody mentioned, islands. There are numerous small islands. This is a very non-exhaustive list of where there are small islands. This is Enggano. It's little. 3,000 people live in Enggano. That's repeated all over. Within Indonesia alone, there are 13,000 islands. Most of them do not have humans, but several thousand do. We also find big islands. These big islands have a very different role to play in the history, the linguistic history and the social history of the Pacific. The large islands, unlike the small islands, have a non-coast component. So when we say Pacific, we think islands, yes. But different kinds of islands are very, very different in what has happened linguistically and what has happened socially when people occupy those islands. And this becomes quite important. When you have a small island, everything interacts with everything else. When you have a larger island, it's quite possible to ignore the coast and ignore influence. The other very important factor when we talk about islands and the Pacific is islands are not stable over time. This chart shows the last 250,000 years of sea level fluctuation around the world. We don't really care about that. Maybe from here on we don't care very much. But at this point, this is when humans start to leave Africa. And around here is when they start arriving in the far western edge of the Pacific. And very importantly for us, during the last ice age, we have a period when sea levels were over 100 meters lower than they are now. It's about 130 meters in the Western Pacific. That point means that while humans are moving into this part of the world, they are occupying a very different landscape from the one we observe now. So, humans occupying this world. There's our Pacific. We have, as I mentioned, a whole lot of islands. We won't list every island around, it's going to be far too long. But these islands were connected to the mainland. So if I zoom in on that area, this is what it looks like 25,000 years ago. All the way to, let me go back for a moment, all the way to Borneo is walkable from Moscow, given enough time and good shoes. Which means that the first human occupation of the Pacific, what is now the islands of the Pacific, was done on foot. This is interesting when we consider the Pacific today. It's actually not very interesting when we consider what humans were doing 30,000 years ago. 30,000 years ago, humans were walking all over Eurasia and Africa. So this initial human occupation is just the same as everywhere else. There's nothing different. Possibly a bit more sunny, depending on the season, certainly warmer, but it's exactly the same social environment that we found elsewhere. Quite probably, these arrows are inaccurate. Quite probably, people were moving along the coast, not moving on the inland. There's more food resources on the coast. But this is also the time, 25,000 years ago, when humans are moving into the interior of Eurasia, starting to occupy this land. So maybe they were inland, we don't know. The next step is more interesting. Even at the lowest sea levels that we've ever had in the Pacific. These are separate islands. There's no escaping that. Maybe people went along the north, maybe people went along the south, we don't know. But what we do know is they had to have some means of traveling over. 40 or 50 years ago, some people hypothesized that they just happened to drift out on the tide on a tree that fell over. This is an unlikely explanation. More likely is people actually built boats. One person can drift away and happen to find their way across a strait. Two people, less likely. A whole community that becomes sustaining? No, that's not it. This happened around 50,000 years ago, probably. Now 50,000 years ago is not when the sea levels were lowest. The sea levels were in between the lowest point and today, maybe 80 meters below sea level, below current sea level. Which means those gaps are actually wider. However, both those routes, the northern route and the southern route, involve traveling from one island to another particular island. Both of those routes involved seeing a destination and getting there by sea. So it's adventurous, but it's not impossible adventurous. I zoom in again on that northern area. This is where things start getting more interesting. Up to 50,000 years ago, we have humans on the edge of this continent, Sun. They walked as far as what is now Borneo, and then they travelled from one island to the next visible island as far as New Guinea and Australia. And then a very exciting thing happens about 30,000 years ago. When they cross to New Britain, that involves going to Umboy Island and then to New Britain. And they head to the south into what is now the Solomons, and they head north along New Ireland. And then, 25,000 years ago, people crossed to Manus Island. Why does Manus get special mention? Manus is not visible from New Ireland. This is the first certain period when humans crossed the ocean at a destination they could not see. This is a deliberate act. This is deliberate use of technology, boat building, to get there. Up to this point, something like this would be sufficient to get here if you were lucky. Maybe. You can see where you're going, it's possible. To get to Manus Island, up there, you need something more dramatic. You need to have deliberately created something which will keep you going in the hope that you find land. This means, well, first a caveat. This was definitely not the kind of boat that was used 25,000 years ago. It's often referred to as the kind of boat. This is the standard story presented frequently, but this is almost certainly not the kind of boat used. But we do know there was a kind of boat used. And that kind of boat had to have been built by people to get there. As I just said, it wouldn't have been something simple like this. It had to have been something more like that, even though it wasn't this kind of boat. It needed something with somewhere to stay in the storms, you don't know. But what it means importantly for us is, let me get back so I can read this properly, a boat that isn't easy to make needs specialist skills to make. For someone to have specialist skills, you need a social organization that allows people to have specializations. To have a social organization requires organizing. To organize requires talking, communicating. And requiring talking means you have language. Crossing ocean is the first time we know for certain that humans were using language to organize their lives. We know that humans have been walking around Eurasia and Africa for 100,000 years, but so have many other animals. Deliberately crossing an ocean with technology is proof that we had complex society, even before we're getting artifacts left behind. The mere fact, let's just go back for a moment, the mere fact that people did cross over the horizon is certainty that they were able to organize society in ways that allow for specialized trades. This is one reason why studying the Pacific is exciting. I personally do not believe that this was the first time language was used. I think it probably went back a long time before that. But at this point we know, without any doubt, that we have this. So demographically we're talking a fairly long period, 50,000 years for Australia and New Guinea. The route humans took to get here was almost certainly following the coast from Africa, simply because that's easy resource gathering. They follow the coast and follow the coast, and around 72,000 years ago, they found their way to northern Malaysia. There's a site whose name I forget at the moment, which has small stone tools made 72,000 years old. And then something very dramatic happened, possibly the most dramatic event in human history. There was a volcanic eruption in what is now Sumatra. The area now known as Danau Toba, Lake Toba, would have been more accurately called Mount Toba at the time. It was an eruption that was 2,000 times larger than Krakatoa, I think. Enormous, and it left a dust cloud afterwards that swept to the northwest and covered the entire Indian subcontinent with 5 meters of ash. All life was extinguished in India. Around the world, the population of living things dropped to 1% of 1% of what it had been before. The population of humans around the world was maximally 10,000, we estimate from genetics. So everything nearly went extinct. In the oceans, marine life lost much more than 1%, much less than 1% of 1% survived. We lost nearly, it was roughly 1 in 1 million organisms survived in the oceans. This was devastating. Global temperatures dropped 5 degrees. It's estimated that there was about a 50-year period in which no sunlight reached the surface of the planet. So we nearly lost everything. And then when it cleared, we finally see humans move further into the Pacific. And that moving into the Pacific, to judge from the genetic work, came in let me rephrase. To judge from the genetics of modern humans, there were 2 waves of human occupancy. One, around 30,000 years ago, people start moving in. It took a long time to recover from the Toba explosion. And then later, something coming from the north. Recall, at lower sea levels, this was joined to the mainland until 15,000 years ago. This was joined until 12,000 years ago. So people have initially entered the Pacific here, and then later there was another flow of genes coming in that direction. So we've got a fairly robust history of human occupation. And recall, this entire time, these are necessarily technology-using humans. These are humans who worked out how to create boats to cross oceans. They had other technological skills as well. I'm not sure what I'm showing. Ah yes, this is the same gene study, looking at the clusterings of where the human gene haplotypes fall. And the sample that they labeled Austronesian is found in that area. The sample that was labeled Digadai there. Geography, the summary, geography is matching genetics quite closely. I'm going to sit down so we can read all of these. The Austroasiatic samples they took, and by Austroasiatic sample I mean a genetic sample of a human who currently speaks an Austroasiatic language. Genes and geography matching nicely. We extend our way through. There's the Negrito peoples of Malaysia. Then we have Negrito of the Philippines, South Central Indonesia, and New Guinea. So even though we have 2 waves of occupation, they're roughly seeing the genetics spread out according to distance. The human demography of the Pacific pretty much matches who's closest to you. This becomes important. What else can we draw on to infer the early human presence in the Pacific? The archaeology of dogs in the area tells another story. Dogs came down this southern route. Dogs are much more recent. This route coming down through Malaysia and along the south in terms of human genes, was the older entrance point. That was the 30,000 to 10,000 year ago point. But dogs are moving along the same path, roughly 4,000 years ago. There's specific dog types found here which aren't found elsewhere. Dogs native to the Pacific don't bark. They lack the barking ability which even wolves have, even though wolves don't do it much. Pigs enter the Pacific along the same path. This is also around 4,000 years ago. Again, this pathway is the pathway which showed human genetic material at around 10,000, 30,000 years ago. But we're seeing the same pathway appearing 4,000 years ago with the arrival of pigs. There were pigs that came from what is now China into Taiwan and then down into the Philippines, but they did not make it to the south and did not make it into the Pacific. There's this larger scale map shows that second kind of pig, which is only found in the Pacific in post-contact situations. So we do find this gene type in Micronesia, Chamorro area and Palau, but it's recent introduction of new pigs. So the pigs here are largely genetically the same as the pigs in Europe. But this kind of pig is a different type. The important thing is the pathway we're looking at. There is a pathway moving along the south. Chickens follow the same path. Chickens also travel south, wobble a little bit up into the Philippines and then out. Bananas show a different story. It is impossible to ever say banana in any context without people laughing. So it goes. The distribution of different banana haplotypes makes it quite clear that, from the biology, that bananas were originally appearing around New Guinea. Later, as they moved west, they were deliberately hybridized with a species from the Philippines. And then, after that had been hybridized together to make a more robust cultivar, they then expanded out. In other words, the pathway that we have to infer for bananas begins around New Guinea, spreads west, mixes with the Philippine banana, and then a new species spreads to mainland Eurasia and on to Africa. These bananas are attested in Africa 3,500 years ago. They are probably doing this movement at around 5,000 years ago. Note that this is Pacific to Asia, not Asia to Pacific. This is important. Sugarcane is even more important. And that sugarcane definitely begins in New Guinea and then spreads out. And it finds its way as far north as Taiwan at the point that linguists reconstruct Proto-Austronesian. Now, if this food type is reconstructed for Proto-Austronesian, it had to have been present in the homeland at that period. But we know that bananas came from New Guinea, not from Taiwan. Taiwan's the wrong biogeographic zone. Therefore, somebody with marine traveling technology brought bananas from New Guinea elsewhere prior to the spread of Austronesian persons and languages. This shouldn't be a surprise, since we know that people used maritime technology to travel from island to island 30,000 years ago. So the fact that they were moving the odd banana about, and who hasn't had a banana as a snack? And you need snacks when you travel across islands. What else? What else? Rice. Rice is originally domesticated in southern China. There are numerous studies showing that all the major variations found in Guangxi, Guangdong, and Hainan area. The spread of bananas into the Pacific, the spread of rice involves, from that homeland in the middle of southern China, the first dispersal was on the mainland in other river valleys of China, followed by the appearance of rice, cultivated rice, later, some in India, some in Southeast Asia, probably independent. And then, as we approach the 4,000 year period, 4,000 years before present, it's spreading quite widely. Notice Nia Cave here. As we get more and more recent, it spreads more and more, and we end up with rice being very widespread in Asia. No surprise. However, this was a 2011 article. The very next year, Graham Barker reported more recent work from Mia Cave in Borneo, and that data showed that the use of rice there, the use of cultivated rice, by which we mean rice selected to not be completely a wild species, but a more usable domesticated species. That use of rice went back to at least 4,000, possibly 5,000 years. In other words, we have to adjust this to make the Borneo rice much earlier. And as Dorian Fuller and his co-authors point out, this spread of rice is coming from here as much as it's coming south. There was a separate rice domestication event here. Part of that is detected ethnographically in the present by the different modes of making rice. The blue dots show areas where rice is produced through agriculture. You flood a field, you grow rice. But down here, the Borneo rice style is a dry cultivation. This is a more recent introduction of rice to Java. It's much more productive, but we can see there is a separate rice growing tradition, which has a different engagement with the plant. And then we hit material culture. This is a drawing from an article by David Bulbeck, which handily summarizes a lot of earlier data. And he points out that there are connections across the islands at 10,000 years ago. So again, this is not a surprise, since we know 30,000 years ago people had the ability to sail between islands. The fact that 10,000 years ago people are exchanging things between Samir and Borneo isn't surprising, but it's worth pointing out. Equally, all across the south, shell ornaments, such as those in the top middle, are being shared across a wide range of islands. There is extensive maritime interaction at 10,000 years before present. And there's interaction with the mainland. Edged rounded stone tools, such as those at the top right, are being exchanged between Vietnam and Borneo 10,000 years ago. Again, this should not be surprising. We know humans came out 30,000 years ago. Why would they not write home from time to time or send care packages to each other? There's no good reason. A little bit later, 6,000 odd years ago, we see more evidence, the more long-distance interaction. Philippines down to past New Guinea. We're seeing adzas, such as in red. We're seeing small levels, and we're seeing more interaction between the islands and mainland Asia. So the picture I'm trying to paint is, since humans moved into what are now the islands of the Pacific, they kept talking to each other, and they talked to their relatives back home, and they exchanged things. This may be very big, there may be small islands and large islands, but they are maintaining contact, they are maintaining interaction. The people on these islands are not isolated. It's a common mistake when we think of the Pacific to think small island far away, isolated, everything's like a perfect laboratory for linguistics. It's a dreadful laboratory for linguistics. It is very hard to travel across 1,000 kilometers of land. It's very easy to travel 1,000 kilometers of ocean if you have a boat. And it's a sit-down job, you don't even have to stand up for it. We advance a little bit further, at around 5,000 years ago, which is just prior to the time that people believe Austronesians spread out, we still find evidence for the dispersal of archaeological artifacts out of New Guinea, interaction between the Philippines and northern Indonesia, a whole lot of interaction between Java and Sulawesi, that's repeated many times, and again, trade between mainland Asia and the islands. This is at 5,000 years. This is, at this point, I hope, a bit boring, because all I'm saying for several slides now is people kept talking to each other. Now that should not surprise anybody. And it's what humans do perhaps best of all. They're really good at talking. Okay, someone said bad talking, but you know what I mean. And then at 4,000 years ago-ish, between 2,500 and 4,000 years ago, this is the period of Austronesian Dispersal, the famous red-slipped pottery, which is basically pottery with a red varnish on it, spreads out. It, without any doubt, it originates up there in Taiwan, and it spreads south and it spreads out into the Pacific. It doesn't spread here. These are areas currently occupied by Austronesian language speakers, but this dispersal out of Taiwan did not actually reach that area. That's okay. We see another tradition of pottery that did spread just a little bit south, black slipped pottery. The purple is the spread of rice. The first spread of rice out of Taiwan went to the Mariana Islands in the Pacific before anything came down. Recall, there's an indigenous rice tradition here. So why would they borrow someone else's weird tasting new rice? We have the dispersal of candle nuts. Candle nuts, pictured there at the top right, are both edible and they're excellent candles, hence the name. If you thread candle nuts on a string, you can light one and it will burn, and then it burns the next one, and it's a great source of light. And finally, almost finally, we've got more materials, and then there's the panel impressed pottery tradition here. The reason they never went for that strange red-slipped pottery, but they kept their own pottery style, which originally came from India. Originally came from India means, yet again, there's extensive interaction here. Extensive enough that while everyone to the north is getting excited about this new pot that is appearing in the shops, they're sticking to their good old panel impressed pottery. They don't like red. So, putting it all together, we can see two waves of human dispersal as judged by the genetics. The earlier one is old, this one's more recent. We can see the dispersal of dogs followed a path roughly like that. Pigs, very similar. Chickens, a little bit different, but again following that arc to the south. Bananas went the other direction. Sugarcane went the other direction. Rice, complicated story. We've got an indigenous rice and, there's the local rice, and up there is the rice that didn't make it out, the one that came from southern China. We see some stone tools being shared between Borneo and the mainland very long ago, 10,000 years ago. We also see Sumatran microliths being spread to peninsular Malaysia. Antlers and pottery are being shared in both directions. There's another pottery style, the panel impressed pottery, which comes out. We have a complicated story. What I haven't shown on this map is these are all at different times. This is not all the same time. This is between 30,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago. But you can see there are some regular patterns here. Nothing does that. Obvious reasons. It's a long way to go. Lots of things do that, some things do that, but people cross the South China Sea without trouble. We have a complex history of interaction. We have a repeated history of interaction. It's not like every 1,000 years someone finds a new direction to travel to. People keep crossing the same path. There's a little bit going this way, there's a bit coming this way, but overwhelmingly this southern path, this southern arc, is used for trade and interaction in both directions. This is the setup, this is the background. This becomes important when we want to consider what does it mean to talk about the linguistics of the Pacific. When we examine linguistic structure and we try to understand the social stories that those structures can tell us, we have to understand what the other disciplines tell us about this. So linguistics. The Pacific essentially has one very big family that takes up most of our attention, and a whole lot of smaller families that are very interesting but get less attention. The Austronesian family is the first or second largest family in the world, depending on language versus dialect. It's certainly the most widely spread family. It occupies that much of the world's surface. It's a little bit over 180 degrees from one side to the other. So it's very widely dispersed. It should be, you'd think, should be a lovely case for examining how languages change, because that and that have little in common. But remember again, people can travel this distance. Into historical times, people are attested traveling 165 kilometers overnight. We know at one point the island of Tapu, up here, was depopulated. There was a big storm, and the water table was flooded. There was no more drinking water. So after many people died, the Tapu Islanders sailed to Tonga to some relatives to see, hey, maybe we've died out, perhaps some of you would like to come because we're getting lonely. And a group of Tongans sailed back. That's a travelling distance. That's a visit the relatives distance. So it's very widely dispersed, but it's socially as coherent as the suburbs of Moscow, probably. People get around. You have a metro system. They have boats. It adds up. Now, those Austronesians.
How long would the journey be?
Right, that's a journey. We don't really know, but it would have been a couple of weeks. Recall that these are people who have the technology to utilize the ocean. Oh, by the way, please interrupt and ask questions anytime. Not only do they have boats, but they have fishing hooks, so they don't have to carry weeks of provisions. They can fish as they go. They can catch rainwater, you can drink fish juices to keep yourself liquid, so to speak. So a long journey, but a doable journey.
Do we really know they made these journeys?
Well, we definitely know that Tapu was resettled from Tonga. We have oral history accounts of it. We also have, in the song language of Tapu, we can see what the earlier Polynesian was like, the earlier Polynesian language was like, and in the spoken language, we can see it's much more like Tongan nowadays. So the linguistics matches the oral history there as well. So it seems right. Even if we ignore things like that, we still have Hawaii being settled from down here. So that's a journey. We have New Zealand being settled from here. These are all known, attested, there's no way we can get around it, journeys. These people, by 1,000 years ago, had become extremely good at this. They were probably, well, we know they weren't that good 30,000 years ago, because humans only got that far. And it was a long time until humans spread out past the Solomons, another 25,000 years. But they did get there. So the Austronesian family, it originates in Taiwan, there's just no question about that. All the data points to that as a homeland. The Austronesians have been argued to have had social influence beyond where we see the linguistics. In other words, there are musical traditions here, and there's Bantu genetic material here, which shows there has to have been interaction with the mainland. Into Southeast Asia, there are historical records describing Malay traders coming to the Irrawaddy River and coming to southern India. There's the possibility of something happening with South America. We just don't really know. The genetics is fraught with contaminations. But they traveled a lot, is the summary. The family tree for all of those looks something like this. This is the standard received view of the family tree, and it's not far, most of it is not in dispute. The Formosan languages, we have 9, Proto-Austronesian probably splits into 10 different groups, and 9 of them are found on the island of Taiwan, Formosa. Then Proto-Malayo-Polynesian splits off, and we split, and we split, and we split. And again, we can quibble with some of the details here, but it's roughly right. Given that family tree, if I start at the far end, start down at Proto-Oceanic. Proto-Oceanic is made up of 9 primary subgroups. If I take the Oceanic group and I weight each subgroup equally, since they're equal subgroups, the center is somewhere there around the Solomon Islands. That's not controversial. Andy Pawley and Roger Green proposed exactly that location in 1981. Proto-oceanic joins up with South Halmahera, West New Guinea, which I'll toggle a bit so you can see. And the weighted average of those two falls about there. And David Kamholtz, who a few years ago finished a thesis on these languages, also proposes an east to west migration. So that makes good sense. And if we join that up with Central Malayo-Polynesian, we get a weighted average there. Adding the rest, it gets complicated because these are not actually a subgroup, they're just a group of languages which didn't fit. But something like that, and if we draw lines between them all, we end up with something like that as a migration history. Nobody would really dispute that. Details here and there, but roughly. That's all good. Now, the issue comes when we zoom in a little bit. We find, while everything here in red is the Austronesian family, and it's widely dispersed, and we understand quite a bit about it, in the middle of that, we have the island of New Guinea, which has a mess of genealogical diversity and typological diversity. New Guinea has 750 extra languages, in addition to the Austronesians spoken on the borders. So Austronesian languages are roughly wherever you see white, that's where it's Austronesian, and everything else is another family. There's probably 30 language families-ish. And then there's Australia, which may be one family or it may be several families. But what we do know is most of it in white is the Pamaninian family or group. So we have one large family and then two areas of large islands with lots of small families. Again, large island versus small island is important. Wherever we have smaller islands like Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomons, we're getting just the Austronesian languages. Where we have the large islands, we're seeing a diversity of non-Austronesians. Something I've just said doesn't make sense. What is it? So I just said, wherever we see the small islands, we see just Austronesians. Where we see large islands, we see diversity.
And why is there no diversity in between?
Yeah, that's pretty big. There should be something there, but everything is classified as Austronesian. So we could rephrase it. Where we see large diversity, we see large islands, but it doesn't necessarily follow the other way. But what it means is, this is a bit more complicated. It's not simple. It's not just Austronesians come, travel to within 100 kilometers of the coast, and everything changes. So there's something complex going on in the process of Austronesian language family spread.
And there are some non-Austronesian languages on the Solomons too.
There are a couple of there are 4 non-Austronesians here, and about 20 there, and there was one here until 1814. It's one of the few languages we have very precise records of language depth. So it's not quite as clean as I presented, but it's close to. Now when we look at the non-Austronesian areas, as I said, New Guinea gives us another 700 odd languages, but that's less than Austronesian. Australia has 200 plus languages at contact. Roughly half of those are still spoken to some degree. But what are they like typologically? We have to have something about the structure in order to do any areal linguistics. One very striking feature of Australian languages, the way in which they are most striking, is their phonologies. This is a prototypical phonology of an Australian language. I'll explain how we arrived at that in 2 lectures' time. This is not what you expect of a language around the world. What strikes you as unusual about it? This could be typical from anywhere in South or Western Australia. But what's the first thing you notice about this phonology? Or rather, this segmental inventory? Not a lot of vowels going there, really not. But this could be an Eskimo language with only 3 vowels, that's possible. Still, a few more vowels would not, you think, be that much trouble for someone to learn.
No but.
Pardon?
No but.
So the plosive system first of all, has no contrast between voiced and voiceless. There is no B corresponding to the P. But also there's a lot of places of articulation. English has 4 places. They're hitting, in Australia, 4 is the absolute minimum. 5 is more common, 6 is the norm. So first of all, the plosive system is very elaborate in one dimension and completely simple in the other dimension. And then, with all of those 6 places of articulation for plosives, there's a nasal for every single one of them. It's quite unusual for every series of plosives to be matched with a nasal. It's attested. It happens in Sudan a lot, happens in the Amazon a fair bit, but it happens in Australia 100% of the time. I think there's one exception. There's one language which doesn't have one nasal per place. Then the liquid system is very elaborate. Globally, there's very little correlation between the number of nasals and the number of liquids. They tend to increase just because as phonological systems become elaborate, they become elaborate in every way. But in Australia, there's a very strong correlation that the more nasals you have, the more liquids you have. It correlates at 0.69, whereas globally the correlation is 0.24. And then there's that vowel system, which is just really not very exciting. If we look at the north of Australia, we find a system more like that occurring more commonly. It's a little closer to global norms, but it's still not really what we expect. We have a voiced-voiceless contrast of sorts in less places, but we still have, in addition to a wattle stop, all those nasals and quite a lot of liquids. Though at least the vowel system is now something that we're not worried about. If we look at the grammar of these languages, just drawing some examples from Walawara, which is spoken up there, so it's kind of in the middle. Walawara is roughly SOV. I say roughly SOV, even though every single example sentence I found in the grammatical description was SOV. But the author, Gavin Green, makes a point of saying that it's not fixed. It's just that none of the examples he presented have any place. Characteristics. The verb shows no agreement, but does show tense. The nouns have a complicated case marking system, which I'll get to in a moment. These languages allow 0 copulars for non-verbal clauses. There's another example, and here's a nice transitive sentence, which is nicely SOV, and then an oblique coming afterwards. Notice another feature here. The good and child, a property concept and an actual real-world object, both allow the same syntax in equative sentences. That's carried through with the fact that the property concept, sharp, is perfectly fine as the head of a noun phrase. Very typically in Australian languages, what we would call adjectives and nouns in European languages, they're the same word class. There's nothing morphosyntactically that distinguishes them. The case system is really nice. Walawara is an extreme case of what goes on all through Australia, in that you have an ergative system, except for pronouns. Pronouns mark accusative. All other nouns mark ergative. Demonstratives mark ergative and accusative. And proper nouns have an overtly marked absolutive as well. So they really like this ergative bias, but they also have a split in the ergative marking such that pronouns, in some languages only first and second person pronouns, don't have ergativity, but appear with accusative. That was Walawara. If we look to the northern languages, they're very, very different. The verbs in the languages up in the north, the coloured shaded areas, typically show agreement for 2 arguments as prefixes. The nouns typically have the gender marker but don't have a case marker. Or if there are case markers, it's only for oblique cases, for instruments or locatives, but not ergative or accusative. Don't know why Walawara appears again. New Guinea. What's typical of New Guinea? Tayak is actually very close to a typical New Guinea language. That's unfortunate because Tayak is spoken in just one village and it's a language isolate. But phonologically, it's as typical New Guinea as you can get. I throw it to the audience again. What strikes you about this phonological inventory?
Prenasalized consonants. Prenasalized consonants.
Yes, so prenasalized consonants is the norm in the north and the east of New Guinea. The absence of a ch is a very common feature in New Guinea as well. You have voiceless and prenasalized, but you're missing the ch.
This slide reminded me that there was an important thing which lacks in Australian languages. They don't have fricatives.
I don't quite want to say that because in the north-east of Australia they have fricatives quite a bit. But yes, we should have pointed out when we looked at phonologies here that there's not a fricative to be seen in your average Australian language. Phonetically, the labials and the velars often unite, but there's no contrasting fricative series. Thank you for bringing that up. Here in New Guinea, we have fricatives, but only just. There's one single little S hiding there, and it's not hard to see where that S came from, right? Yeah. It's attested in many other languages that you find a dialect with a ch and a dialect with an S. So very likely the gap for ch has evolved into an S. Fricatives are not very popular in New Guinea languages, more so than Australia, but only just. The vowel system is more exciting, and liquids are very different. So we have a very different phonological typology. Australia had lots of places of articulation for plosives, lots of liquids, few vowels. Your typical New Guinea system has a world average number of places of articulation, two contrasts, but very light on the liquids and more normal from a world perspective on vowels, including that high central vowel. Looking at another language, Iha, it's typically SOV, but in the noun phrase only the genitive precedes the head. And we see a lot of agreement marking on verbs. I have a hard time describing this because it seems so completely modal to me. This is what I expect a language to look like. What strikes you as unusual about the grammar from these two entire examples? I mean, one great advantage of coming somewhere far away from New Guinea is I get fresh perspectives from people. So what strikes you as worthy of noting in this example?
What does mean 1/2?
First person or second person?
Ah, okay.
So I guess one feature of New Guinea languages, which is not going to be drawn anywhere anytime soon, is there's often a collapse of first and second person versus others. So first and second person versus third, singular versus plural, often divides paradigms up into four, like that. It's a reasonably common. Ways in which this is very different from Australia is we see both case marking and agreement in the same clause. Ways that it's different from Australia is the fixed genitive preceding the noun, and then everything else fixed following the noun. Another feature we should mention for New Guinea is a reasonably large number of tone languages. So another way it's very different from Australia. Languages of Australia have only once ever been described as tonal, and only one language, and no one's ever followed up on that, so we don't really know. So I've given you a very quick, a very brief outline of what a language of Australia looks like. We'll visit this much more later. A very brief look about what languages of New Guinea look like, the non-Austronesian ones. These are the typical features of Austronesian languages. What strikes you about these features compared to Australia or New Guinea? There are none. There are none. I can say SOV for New Guinea, and I will bet my life savings that this SOV is normal. I will say case marking for the southern languages, agreement for the northern languages in Australia. I will bet whatever you want. This is the complete list of features typical of Austronesian languages. We can say, for instance, phonologically, up in the north, they have a single series of stops, or maybe voiceless versus imploded. But if I move further south, it's typically voiceless versus voiced. If I move further east, it's typically voiceless versus prenasalized. Voiceless versus prenasalized, just like the languages of New Guinea. Oh, I'm just next to New Guinea. What coincidence. I go far out and it's just voiceless again. There is no modal pattern. There is no typical, you expect this. I can quite happily say, out here I expect voiced versus voiceless. Out here I expect only a single series. Around Melanesia I expect a prenasalized series in addition. But I cannot say what is typical for Austronesian languages as a whole, because there is no modal value. Even within subgroups, if they spread across areas, you find both patterns. That's the manner dimension for plosives. If I look at how many plosives you find in terms of series, up in the far north you find a very elaborate series of stops. That's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 supralaryngeal stops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plus a glottal stop. But that would be unheard of anywhere other than Taiwan. I go down to the Philippines, it's typically just 3, the phonologically basic ones. If I head down to the southwest, I acquire a palatal series. Then I'm close to Southeast Asia, which typically has 4 series of stops. I head further east, I don't have the palatals, I might have a rounded series of stops. And I head further out and I'm back to just PTK. Again, there is nothing that's typical everywhere. The languages of Taiwan with the 6 supralaryngeal series and the glottal stop are the languages closest to Proto-Austronesian. But as soon as I leave Taiwan, nobody looks like Proto-Austronesian.
What about Madagascar?
What about
Madagascar?
Madagascar matches this set, plus the addition of some retroflex stops. And it has a prenasalized series. People used to say that prenasalized were through contact with Bantu, but in fact prenasalized stops are common in the interior of Borneo as well. What else can we say? Vowel systems. Up in the north of the Austronesian range, they're very small. Taiwan and the Philippines, just 3 vowels usually. If I go west from there, we have huge elaborate vowel systems. Just like Thai or Austroasiatic languages also spoken in the area. If I go south, the systems are not quite so complex, but they are attesting that many in Javanese. And then Western Indonesia, typically 5 or 6 vowels. As I head east, it drops down to 5. 5 stays the norm as I head out into the Pacific. But in the southern Philippines, we have a funny kind of 5 vowel system as well. Once again, there is no typical value. Proto-Austronesian is reconstructed with just 3 vowels, but 3 vowels is almost unheard of as soon as you leave that Proto-Austronesian area. It's almost as if somebody influenced them to have more vowels. Austronesian languages are attested as SOV in that part of the Austronesian world. They're attested as object initial in just a couple of cases north of there. They're attested as SVO in quite a wide range of regions. SVO is a pretty common word order to find. They're attested not as SVO there, but as VOS. And we also get some confusion on VSO. Pretty much everything. Pretty much everything's found. There is no known OVS Austronesian language. That's it for word order. What we do find is when they're closest to the mainland of New Guinea, their languages are usually SVO, the Austronesians are SVO. When they're on the mainland of New Guinea, their languages tend to be SOV, then the Austronesians are SOV. And there's some sort of verb initial thing going on when you're not close to either of those areas. Case marking, it's big in Polynesia, it's big in Taiwan and the Philippines, and that's it. Agreement, big near New Guinea, where you will recall languages show agreement, and there's a little bit in central Indonesia, and that's it. This is even better expressed if I show you a map. This is where languages have agreement. Red is there is verbal agreement in the language. Blue is there is not verbal agreement. Spot the language family boundary. You can quite clearly see that around here there's a lot of red, all the way out there, across New Guinea, in Micronesia, and extending maybe halfway across Indonesia. You can see there's a couple up here, and then these languages don't have any agreement, all the way from there to there, from there to there. If I travel along that route, I cover 5 language families. They all show the same lack of agreement. If I travel here, I probably cross 30 language families and find agreement. If I look at case marking, again, can you spot the language family boundary where it becomes clear that you've changed? In southern India, we have Dravidian and then Munda, then Tibeto-Burman languages and Indic languages, all with case. Sinitic languages, Prongian, Daikadai, Austroasiatic, without case. Austronesian languages, which don't differentiate accusative or ergative systems. But then when we find a way out here, we do find some Austronesians that do. I can put them together. The big point is, there is not a characteristic of Austronesian as a language family. If I were to look at the other, recall, Austronesian is either the first or the second largest family in the world. The other one, which is either the second or the first largest, is Niger-Congo. And there are definitely strong characteristics of Niger-Congo. I mean, once you hit Niger-Congo, it's getting weaker than lower levels, but they're definitely there. But Austronesian fails rather miserably. So we looked at this map of non-linguistic traits relevant to the demography of the Pacific. And if we draw in a blue line, here's where the Austronesian languages go, it's something like that. Now, clearing away the clutter and having a look at what we have coming out of the north. We've got the human genetics coming out of the north. The problem, though, is that map on the right, the more recent genetic dispersal that came from Taiwan to the south, is between 7,000 and 5,000 years old. The other dispersal, red-slipped pottery, is 4,000 years ago, and it didn't cover the whole area. But these are very different events. What time did the Austronesian languages appear out of Taiwan? Most people try to tie it to the dispersal of red-slipped pottery. Maybe, maybe not, who knows. But the point is, it doesn't tie to the genetics. That's awkward. There's a large gap between a most recent possible date of 5,000 years and a latest possible date of 4,000 years. There's 1,000 years in there which doesn't add together. And recall, of all the other things that archaeologists have found for us, that's it. We do see in grey here some rice and some pigs dispersing south from Taiwan, but they fail to get past the central Philippines because we have different rice tradition native to Borneo, different pig species spreading out from mainland Southeast Asia. So of all these different types of archaeological interaction between the Pacific, the Western Pacific, and mainland Asia, the only one that matches the out-of-Taiwan origin of the Austronesian languages is the genetics, which is too early, and the red-slipped pottery, which is incomplete. And yet we do have 1,200 Austronesian languages out there. So we have a couple of questions we have to ask about them, or answer, hopefully. What does it mean to be in a language family? If we say there are 1,200 Austronesian languages there, is that the same as saying there are 1,200, well, okay, not 1,200, what's another language subgroup somebody knows-ish? How many Romance languages do you think there are? I don't know, someone throw them in.
18.
80. Is saying there are 80 Romance languages the same level of proof as saying there are 1,000 Austronesian languages? Or are we talking different kinds of argumentation? What defines being in a language family? I'm not saying this is controversial, but we just have to examine it to make sure we're talking the same level of proof. We know how to define, how to do historical linguistics. Let's just check in detail. What does it mean for a language family to expand? Austronesian languages did begin in Taiwan. Austronesian languages are now found from Madagascar to Polynesia, Hawaii, Easter Island. What does it mean for a language family to move from a small area to a large area? We've just seen that archaeologically it doesn't mean much at all. And genetically, the expansion south from Taiwan was at the wrong time for the linguistic expansion. If the linguistic expansion is tied to the pots, if the linguistic expansion was earlier, then it's fine, but then the pots aren't covered. So if the linguistic expansion matches the genetics, then it's a genetics plus language without any material culture. If the linguistic expansion matches the pots, and these aren't just cooking pots, these are ceremonial pots. These are pots with high ethnographic value. They're important things. They're valued artifacts. If the linguistic expansion matches the expansion of the pottery style, then it's occurring without any genetic material. So we come back to, what does it mean for a language family to expand into a larger range? What are the ways language families can end up occupying a much bigger area? 19th century, we talked about migrations. It was very European colonial, grand march of advanced peoples helping the savages to finally modernize and grow food. But that's very simplistic, and it's not likely. And finally, how do languages change? What are the ways we see change in language? It's not like we've never asked these questions. We know this stuff, but we need to ask them in detail in areas where we can get some good data. If we assume, which we're not, because I've already told you it's crazy, if we assume that widely distanced islands are developing in isolation, then we will not understand how widely separated islands can be similar. If we assume that there's, where was it? Tonga's about there and Taku is here. If we assume that everything in that range is contact, then we have a hard time explaining New Guinea being the way it is. We need more sophisticated models. We need to be able to not say, this is how it happens, one line explanation. But we need to be a bit more sophisticated about what it means to expand, what it means to change, and what it means in the first place to say, you're a language that's Austronesian. What does it mean to be a Romance language? Genuine question, just for the sake of argument.
To be a descendant of Latin by sound changes.
Would French-based Creoles count as Romance languages? So we have a decent and a very sensible definition of a Romance language or any language family or subgroup, but we know there are tricky cases. We can talk about Haitian Creole as a tricky case because we happen to know the history of the social history of the language and how it developed. We do not, across most of this region, have any written records past. There's some large empires with good records, but out here we know nothing except what other people reported. So we have to develop tools to be able to infer contact situations, such as Haitian Creole. And based on calibrating with something like Haitian Creole, we can maybe go back and start understanding what it meant to change in these parts of the world as well. This is what I'm hoping to do in just 4 quick lectures. But that's roughly the plan. They're going to use this part of the world as a laboratory, and the problems that they're facing with the lack of coherence, the lack of written records, the lack of interdisciplinary evidence arguing in the same direction. I hope you'll see that they are actually really useful in making us linguists be good linguists and then inform other disciplines, because we have a more sophisticated view of just saying, you're a Romance language. Yes, you are. You're a descendant of Latin through regular correspondences. And then what do we say about the Creoles? Then it gets hard. And in a family purported to have over 1,000 languages, the proportion of, and then there are the Creoles, starts becoming rather large. So, that's what I'm hoping we get to cover, and that's the end. Thank you. The alert members of the audience will have noticed you've seen her before.
May I ask a question?
Please, two questions.
They are so they have some different syntax, and what about lexical roots and water places?
So, yeah, lexical roots are, of course, the very first glance at do you two look similar to each other? And yes, they preserve the lexicon quite well, depending on where we're talking about. But there are matters of how you preserve the lexicon, which I'll address tomorrow. But this is what I deliberately didn't cover at all, was what about the lexicon? What about sound change? What about everything we know about how to do historical linguistics? Yeah. So we have to do that. Peter, is that a question or?
Well, probably a brief remark. Well, actually, if we look at the best Untitled Family, the Indo-European, we will see that Indo-European also sort of has a common profile.
You can typologically define Indo-European compared to the other languages of Eurasia in terms of, I can't remember the exact number, but I can show you tomorrow. There's about 20 traits which are statistically significantly different.